Greetings and salutations, YouTubers. This is ZillaFan85, and for today's video, I wanted to go ahead and do a discussion for what for me is one of my personal favorite Godzilla movies in the entire franchise, and that is, of course, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Like I said, this is definitely one of my favorite movies, from the Godzilla series. Actually, it would be, if any of you have followed along with me, you would know that this is actually my second favorite Godzilla movie ever, right behind Destroy All Monsters. So it's obviously way up there. I've really loved this movie ever since the first time I saw it, and have watched it many times and will never get tired of this, for sure. But of course that's the case with pretty much, at least most of the Godzilla movies anyway, but certainly for these ones that are at the top of the list, I can watch nonstop. So this one, I figured I would go ahead and make a video on it, just discussing the movie. If any of you have kind of seen my format, when I do these sorts of videos, it's not really a review per se, it's really just kind of discussing the movie. I do kind of go over what the movie's about, and et cetera, but it's really not a review. It's just kind of me getting a chance to just kind of discuss it, just because it's a movie that I love, and, certainly welcome any interaction from any of the rest of you to share your thoughts, of course. So just a couple things to note here with this film. It is the fifth movie in the Godzilla series, and it was also the second one that was produced in 1964, the year that it came out. It followed up on Mothra vs. Godzilla, which is another Godzilla movie that I absolutely love, and it's certainly among my favorites. You'll definitely notice that trend, if you haven't already, that the Showa era Godzilla movies are the ones that I like the best overall. And especially these ones from like the the 50s/60s era Godzilla movies. But anyway, though, like I said, so I just kind of wanted to note a couple things. The other thing about the movie, and that you're always in good hands when this happens, is that it did have the big four. I'm not talking about kaiju. I'm talking about the big four members, who worked on the production team, for Toho for the Godzilla movies. Back at this time period, I'm talking about, of course, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka, director Ishiro Honda, special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya, and of course music composer Akira Ifukube. Like I said, they are the big four members of the Toho Godzilla movies, and it's definitely a shame, now that we've lost all of them, back, I believe, after the Heisei era had ended, and just for me personally, I noticed the difference in movie content after they were no longer behind the scenes, of the Godzilla movies, and then of course, otherwise, just some of the actors and stuff, like, of course, just things to note, like of course the passing of Haruo Nakajima, the actor who portrayed Godzilla in many of the early Showa era Godzilla films, and and portrayed other kaiju as well. So I always like to note that. He was at a convention that I went to, but unfortunately didn't get the chance to meet him. I did meet Akira Takarada, which I was very privileged to be able to do. But I don't want to digress too much. Like I said, though, I just wanted to kind of mention that those four big names were behind this project, and like I said, in my opinion, you always know that you're in good hands when they are producing the film. So, along with that, so again, this being an early Showa era movie, it is, of course, one that I absolutely love. There will be, obviously there will be spoilers mentioned within the video, so just be forewarned in case any of you haven't seen it. But this one, really brought about a change for sure in the Godzilla movies with the format, and especially too with monsters teaming up, to take on a bigger threat, if you will. So that was really cool, and of course. This being the first time that Godzilla actually ends up changing from being an antagonist, a villain type kaiju to being a more anti-hero, protagonist type kaiju, which he had to be convinced of to do. We'll get to that in a little bit, but certainly something that is a big thing to note though here, and this was the starting point of that. So anyway, though, let's go ahead and just get into the movie a little bit. So it certainly has a sort of unique storyline. So with that. Okay, so as you can see, I just kind of wanted to bring up, these are basically at least the bulk of the main characters of the film. As you see, I sort of have the one in the middle, Princess Selena Salno. A lot of things seem to center around her in the film. She really is the one that sort of moves the story along. This is sort of a mesh, like a blending of plots, essentially. So basically, you've got a meteor shower that takes place at the beginning of the film and a meteor crash site, in the mountains. And that's where sort of Professor Mirai, as you can see over there, comes in. He sets out with an expedition team to study the meteor, at the crash site. So you've got that sort of subplot going on, and then more of the sort of the main plot is this sort of I don't know if you would call it espionage or but this sort of plot against Princess Selena Salno, of Sergina, where there's this sort of other power that's within the country that wants to eliminate her because she's supposed to be next in line to take the throne of the country. From what I read up, because they, as far as I know, they never really mentioned. You see the man who's mainly behind that earlier on in the film. But as far as I know, they never really mentioned who he was. But when I read up on it, I guess it was actually supposed to be Princess Selena's uncle. So I'm not 100% sure if that is accurate, but that is at least what I read. And so with that, he sent out his top assassin, Malmus, who you can see over there, to go ahead and try and eliminate the princess. First, he puts a bomb on the plane because she's traveling to Japan, obviously on some sort of ambassador type, goodwill. Travel, I guess it was. I don't know if they ever really explained it. All the times I watched the movie, and I don't really know if they ever really explained that. I guess it was some sort of goodwill, travel that she was doing, some sort of ambassador mission. Anyway, though, so Malmus had put a bomb on the plane to blow it up. And sort of a mix though with the meteor, with that meteor shower that I just previously mentioned, because when one of them passes over the plane, some sort of voice speaks to the princess and tells her to get out of the plane, which she does do, and jumps out of a plane and somehow survives. That was sort of explained with with that sort of bullshit movie logic later, but I don't worry about that too much, especially when I'm watching a Godzilla movie, because I just love it anyway. So, but anyway, though, then this too is sort of where one of the other main characters in the movie, and of course I'm talking about Detective Shindo, comes in, because he was supposed to be hired as a he's on the police force, and he was supposed to be a bodyguard for Princess Selena while she was visiting Japan, but then found out that her that her plane had crashed. They didn't know if it was foul play or not, but I guess, he kind of suspected it. But then later found her picture in a newspaper, I should say, and that being not the one that you see with her looking more like a princess, but the other one where she sort of looks raggedy. The two pictures that I have of Princess Selena on this. So he sees that picture, and he pretty much thinks that it's her, at least, and he wants to try and set out to see if it is her and try to protect her, etc., etc. So his chief, who was actually played by Akihiro Hirata, of course, Dr. Serizawa, and he portrayed quite a numerous amount of roles in the Godzilla films. But anyway, though, he basically lets Detective Shindo do it, but he says, it's sort of off the record that he's going to be working to try and find the princess and protect her. And he has to confirm that it is her as well. And this is sort of too where this plot changes, because I guess because of the fall and because of her surviving when she awoke, she didn't really know who she was. So it came out in the paper that she was prophetizing things to happen. So they called her the prophetess at that point. And she was basically saying, well, in the American version, which obviously is the dubbed version, the one that I always grew up with, she called herself a Martian, but I guess actually in the original Japanese version, it was supposed to be a Venetian, that she was from Venus, not Mars. But again, I'm more familiar with the English dub, so whichever one you want to go with. But anyway, though, so that's where she was claiming to be from, and that she was able to prophetize about events that were going to take place, and of course, trying to warn the people of Earth about catastrophic events that were going to happen. But obviously, no one believed her. The only one, though, who was interested, for story purposes and for really trying to see if this was true or not, is none other than Detective Shindo's sister, and that's Naoko Shindo, who obviously I also have pictured there because she's a major player in this. So she tries to get the story with the with the princess, or at that point calling her the prophetess. So she's very interested in all that. So she's trying to follow her around and get the and get her story, while Detective Shindo's trying to find her and protect her, because he's definitely convinced that is Princess Selena. So a couple of events that she warned of basically do end up becoming true. So another reason why Naoko was definitely interested in this story. And so kind of with that, this is sort of where things really come into play, at least with the kaiju aspect of the film. So we'll go ahead and move along from here. And just as I was mentioning, Godzilla and Rodan, who both end up emerging and start wreaking havoc, and then of course they end up crossing paths with one another and battling each other, and it was a pretty cool little fight, although I gotta admit, Rodan seems to have quite the upper hand in the battle. But anyways, though, these the two of them returning, or at least emerging from their slumber and wreaking havoc, those were prophetized by the princess that they were going to happen. Rodan awoke from the Wadajin Mountains, breaking free of them of the inner crust from the mountainside, and going on a rampage. And then of course Godzilla emerging from the ocean, and there with that, there was a ship that because the Mothra fairies had visited from Infant Island, and they're supposed to be going on a ship, and I guess they're going to be returning home after that. But the prophetess, the princess, showed up on the ship and said that it shouldn't sail because it was, because there was something bad going to happen. It's kind of how she left it. She didn't really exactly say what was going to happen, but of course, what ends up happening is Godzilla emerges and he, of course, destroys the ship. However, though, the twin fairies of Infant Island, the Mothra fairies, did heed her warning and escaped. So they do play a factor into the movie as well. They don't have as big of a role as they did previously, like in the original Mothra or Mothra versus Godzilla, but they definitely do their part. And I always enjoy seeing the Mothra fairies. I think they're really cool. So nonetheless, though, so they sort of join up with the princess, and she's with Nyoko at this point, and I guess at that point at that point too, they're at this hotel, and that's when Detective Shindo, when he catches up with them, and he's trying to insist that she's the princess, not just some weird, Martian or Venetian who can prophetize events. And then, of course, that's too when Malmus and the group of thugs that he hired sort of catch up with them. So you're starting to see more of a blending of events happening here, with the sort of kaiju action happening in the background. So there's definitely a lot of human focus on it, but it's weird, but it's kind of an interesting story, though. It's definitely very enjoyable to watch. So you've got all this happening, and then of course another event which the princess have prophetized has ended up coming true as well. This she more or less states after Detective Shindo brings her to Dr. Tsukamoto in the mountainside because he wants to have her examined, and try to find out who she really is, if she is the princess or not. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into this. And what I am talking about is, at this point, a new monster called King Ghidorah. Yep, he appears, and because now this is where you really start seeing things culminate together. Professor Mirai, who is also a friend, I guess he was dating, or he was just a friend. They kind of really left that a little bit ambiguous, but he knew Nyoko Shindo. They were at least friends, if not dating, and he was obviously studying the meteor crash site, and the meteor eventually cracks open, and in a really cool burst of energy, you see something come out of it and take form, and that is of course King Ghidorah. So he emerged from the meteor. That's how he came to Earth, and of course the sort of this destroyer of worlds that he was at this point, really shows you what a badass kaiju King Ghidorah was, and he was of course hell-bent on destroying the Earth, and this was an event too that that the princess had prophetized was going to happen, and this is when it comes to be, where she lets it be known that her planet, whichever version you're watching, whether it's Mars or Venus, they were a highly advanced civilization, and King Ghidorah had come to their planet thousands of years ago and basically laid it to waste, and saying it as far advanced as they were, that the Earth wouldn't have much of a chance at this point, since he did, since now he's come to Earth to destroy it. So she said, though, that there was a small amount of the Martians/Venetians that escaped and went to Earth, and basically, lost most of their abilities over time as they became Earthlings. But she said they always maintained that innate ability for prophetizing the future. So that's kind of where it comes to be at that point. So, like I said, this is really where you see the blending of all the, of all the plot points as well. So, so while they're at the lab too, at the at that medical lab, with her being examined and Shindo being there, this is sort of where Malmus and his gang catch up to them to try and take out the princess once and for all. And then obviously you still have in the background that it was mentioned with Godzilla and Rodan still battling, and you do see it cut to them as well. And while all this is going on, Professor Mirai and Naoko are trying to convince the government, of an idea that they have, which actually the Mothra fairies had sort of came up with. So they presented it to them because they were seeing if Mothra could help against King Ghidorah as this new threat, but they said that they knew, since Mothra, in this film is only a larva, that they said that she wouldn't be able to defeat King Ghidorah. However, their idea was for Mothra to try and convince Godzilla and Rodan to join forces with her, and to see if the three of them combined could stop King Ghidorah. So, with that, that's how it goes right to this. And like I said, so the Twin Fairies, the government agrees that this would be probably their only solution, so they call for Mothra for help, and Mothra does arrive on the scene where Godzilla and Rodan are fighting. She kind of has to use some force to stop them with her silk web. It's a pretty funny little, little interlude there that they have, if you will. So basically, though, you see Mothra trying to plead with Godzilla and Rodan to join her against King Ghidorah. At this point, Shindo, the princess, who are all, and the Dr. Tsukamoto, who are all rejoined by Professor Mirai and Naoko. They escape from the lab with Malmus and his gang sort of in the background, I guess, trying to get away of their own as well, while still trying to pursue the princess too. But nonetheless, though, they get to a point where they want to try to find out what's going on with the interaction between the monsters. So the Mothra fairies, who are able to understand the language of the kaiju, they have them sort of translate what the monsters are saying, and it's, for many people, it's always a very weird scene. I always like it. I always get a kick out of it, especially if any of you know the movie well. Ooh, Godzilla, that terror language. Oh gosh, that's one of my favorite parts of the conversation. But they're trying to explain what the monsters are saying, how Mothra's saying it's their duty to protect the Earth and mankind, and Godzilla and Rodan disagree and saying that they don't care what happens to man, and that mankind have always treated them poorly, and that's why they don't like man and just want to destroy them. So Mothra's doing her best to convince them, but in the end, basically, long story short, it just ends up as no avail, trying to convince them. So Mothra feels at this point her only option is to just try and take on King Ghidorah herself, and sort of that's where I sort of depicted that there. Godzilla and Rodan seem pretty surprised by this, but Mothra again feels that this is her only option at this point. So when she does engage King Ghidorah, who sort of arrived in the nearby area, obviously that doesn't go too well for her. She's definitely getting her tail whipped. But this sort of showmanship of bravery and courage, if you will, actually inspires Godzilla and Rodan, who end up having a change of heart at this point. And this brings us to this. And of course, talking about none other than the climactic epic battle, which does take place, and that is with Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra now joining forces and taking on King Ghidorah. And it's definitely an epic fight, and you do see the monsters sort of coordinate strategies and try and figure out how to work together to defeat King Ghidorah. You've got Godzilla, sort of throwing rocks and involved in a lot of melee combat with King Ghidorah. Rodan trying to help out, Mothra doing what she can and trying to see if she can at least tie up King Ghidorah with her silk web. Rodan ends up letting her get on his back and taking flight with her, at least to hover above the ground at a high enough point where she has better leverage to try and wrap up King Ghidorah, and at the same time Godzilla, distracting him, by taking him on. So it's a really, really cool fight. It's not my favorite kaiju battle, but it's definitely up there, and anytime you've got 4 kaiju involved in combat, it's always going to be pretty awesome in my opinion. And like I said, just the way too that Godzilla and the others coordinate together against King Ghidorah, it was really, really awesome to watch. This is definitely, like I said, up there amongst my favorite kaiju battles of all time. And while this is going on, you still got that human subplot, a landslide which ends up actually killing most of the thugs. The only one who's left is the main assassin Malmus, who tries to still tries to go after the princess, and what ends up culminating in a situation there with basically the princess and Detective Shindo being trapped on a mountainside, and Malmus firing his rifle at them. And basically they're at a point, well, the princess gets grazed on the head, and this actually brings her consciousness back so that she remembers who she is. Obviously, she's kind of lost at this point, but being in that life or death situation with Malmus, though, that sort of takes precedence. And when it looks like Malmus is gonna get the kill on both Detective Shindo and the princess, another landslide takes place with the kaiju fighting nearby, and he ends up getting caught in it, and he basically meets his end, with that landslide. So that sort of finishes that little subplot right there. And at the same time, you still see Godzilla and the others fighting King Ghidorah. And finally, he gets wrapped up enough in Mothra's silk web and then pretty much overpowered by Godzilla, at that point at least. So King Ghidorah, who seems to have a knack for doing this as powerful as he is, decides his best option is to retreat. And so he takes off into the skies and back into outer space to... shall we say never be seen again? Yeah, leave a question mark on that. If any of you know the Godzilla movies well, you know that that's not the case. So, but definitely an awesome fight nonetheless. And then, of course, after that, everything has sort of concluded, and the princess can safely return home. And she thanks, Detective Shindo and Naoko for doing what they could to help her and protect her. And then, of course, Godzilla and Rodan, sort of wish their farewells, if you will, to Mothra and the fairies who are returning back to Infant Island, and that's basically how the movie ends. So, that's pretty much it. But again, though, this is a movie that I really, really love. It's got a lot of, a lot of things happening. Like I said, a lot of plots and subplots with events in the movie. So it can be a bit much to keep track of, but. Again, though, I really love it. It's my second favorite Godzilla movie of all time, and it's one that I'll absolutely never get tired of, that I can just watch a million times over and still, love it every time I watch it. And that'll, of course, always be the case. And certainly all 4 of these monsters are in my top 10 favorite. I mean, obviously, Godzilla, my favorite kaiju of all time, but, Rodan, King Ghidorah in my top 5, Mothra in my top 10, and just with the whole, because I liked Godzilla as a villain, but I also did like him as that hero / anti-hero role that he took took up in the Showa era. So this was sort of that changing point. Like I said, this movie. So this was definitely a big turn in the series at this point in time, anyways, at least for the Showa era. So, so this really was a major stepping stone here. And again, just being one of my favorite Godzilla movies, I was just really looking forward to being able to just do a video on it and just discuss the film. But that pretty much does wrap it up from what I'm thinking here. I know I tend to go on quite a bit. I apologize. I could talk about the film all day, but I'm trying not to go too overboard. So that's why I didn't want to make it too long. But anyway, though, folks, with that. So this does pretty much bring us to the end of the video. I would definitely like to thank you so much for watching. If you would like to subscribe, please feel free to do so. If you would like to like and or comment on any of my videos, please feel free to do so as well. Definitely with this one, like I said, this being one of my favorite Godzilla movies, I want to hear from any of you guys, what your thoughts and opinions of this film in particular go, where you rank this in the franchise, what your favorite Godzilla movies are, etc., etc. Like I said, I always welcome that conversation. I love talking anything, Godzilla with people, of course, and always will. But again, though, folks, like I said, this does pretty much wrap it up. So, but just remember, though, ladies and gentlemen, you be good to yourselves, and sayonara.